Right, diving into some pretty intense waters today. The Israel-Iran conflict. You
It's
know,
been all over the headlines. Missile exchanges, millions seeking shelter.
Well,
Feels like the whole world is holding its breath, wondering what's next.
absolutely.
But this isn't just some sudden explosion of tension. This is a conflict with roots that run deep. It's tangled up in history, ideology, generations of mistrust.
Yeah.
So today we're going to go beyond the headlines. We're going to try to untangle this web,
Okay.
explore the historical context, key players, their motivations, and really try to understand what this latest escalation means for the region and, frankly, for the world.
For the world, yeah.
So to kick things off, let's go back in time a bit. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been, well, less than friendly for a very long time.
That's an understatement. Yeah, we're talking about decades of friction, fueled by everything from religious and cultural differences to territorial disputes, deep-seated mistrust, and Iran's support of groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas in the Palestinian territories has definitely added fuel to the fire.
Absolutely.
Right.
From Israel's perspective, Iran's financial and military aid to these groups is a direct threat to their security. It's created this cycle of retaliation, this tit for tat, that makes finding any kind of lasting peace incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and it brings us to 2024, where things have taken a dramatic turn. We saw Hezbollah launching missile strikes into Israel, and then Israel responding with something we haven't seen before, direct strikes on targets inside Iran. So I'm curious, what do you think is driving this shift in Israel's strategy?
It's a bold move, that's for sure. By striking Iran directly, Israel is sending a very clear message. They're signaling that they're not content with simply containing Iran's influence. They're willing to escalate, to engage directly, and that changes the whole dynamic of the conflict.
Feels like a gamble, though, doesn't it? Showing strength, but also raising the stakes and the risks.
Exactly. There's a real danger of miscalculation here, of provoking an even wider conflict. And we have to consider what this means for the people caught in the middle of all of this.
Yeah, let's talk about the details of these attacks. Israel hit Tehran, the capital, and other targets in northern Iran. What exactly were they aiming to achieve? What were those targets?
The sources indicate that Israel was going after strategic targets, aiming to cripple Iran's military capabilities, specifically their missile program and their ability to continue supporting groups like Hezbollah. It was a show of force, a message of deterrence, but also an attempt to disrupt Iran's ability to project power in the region.
And Iran's response was anything but subtle. Over 200 ballistic missiles launched at Israel. That's not just a slap on the wrist.
No, it's a full-blown retaliation, a massive show of force. To put that into perspective, 200 missiles is comparable to some of the largest missile barrages in recent history. It speaks volumes about Iran's current capabilities and their resolve to respond forcefully to what they see as an act of aggression.
It's a terrifying thought, imagining those missiles raining down. What strikes me is the sheer terror this must have inflicted on civilians on both sides.
Absolutely. Imagine a family in Tel Aviv, forced to spend nights in a bomb shelter, unsure if their home will be there when they return. That's the reality for millions right now. And the psychological impact of living under constant threat like that is immense.
And it's not just the immediate danger, is it? There's the long-term trauma, the disruption to daily life, the potential for lasting economic hardship. These are scars that can last for generations.
You're absolutely right. The humanitarian cost of this conflict is staggering. We have to remember that behind the headlines and the military maneuvers, there are real people whose lives are being shattered.
So far, we've focused on Israel and Iran. But this conflict is far from a simple two-sided affair. There's a whole web of alliances and other players that make this situation even more complex.
You're right. It's like a tangled knot of historical grievances, political agendas, and regional power struggles. To understand this conflict, we have to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, so let's start with Hezbollah and Hamas. We know they're backed by Iran, but how significant are they in this current escalation? What role are they playing?
Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, and Hamas, operating in Gaza, are more than just proxies for Iran. They're powerful actors in their own right. Remember, it was Hezbollah's missile strikes that initially triggered this latest round of escalation. They have their own motivations, their own goals, and their own capabilities. And because of their alliance with Iran, Israel is essentially fighting a multi-front war.
And then there's this term we hear a lot, Iran's axis of resistance. What exactly is that, and what are they trying to achieve?
This so-called axis of resistance is a loose coalition of Iran, Hezbollah, and other groups and countries that oppose Israel's presence in the Middle East. They see themselves as resisting Western dominance and supporting groups that share their ideology. This axis makes the conflict far more complicated because it draws in other countries, raises the stakes, and makes it much harder to find a solution.
Yeah, it's like a geopolitical game of chess, with each move having ripple effects across the entire region. And speaking of key players, we can't ignore the role of the United States and Russia.
They are definitely major players in this game. The U.S. has been a steadfast ally of Israel for decades, providing not just diplomatic support, but also significant military aid, including technology like the Iron Dome defense system.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Can you explain how the Iron Dome works and how effective it's been against these attacks?
The Iron Dome is a remarkable piece of technology. It uses radar to detect incoming rockets and missiles, and then fires interceptors to blow them up in midair. It's like a high-tech shield protecting Israeli cities. It's been incredibly effective against the shorter-range rockets we've seen in the past, but the missiles coming from Iran are a different story. They have a longer range, which poses a new challenge for the system.
Okay, and what about Russia? I've read that they might be supporting Iran. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there have been reports of Russian-made weapons being found in the arsenals of Hezbollah. That raises some interesting questions about Russia's role in all of this. While they might not be directly involved in the conflict, their potential support for Iran could have major geopolitical implications, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already tangled web.
Wow, it's clear that this conflict is far more than just a military clash.
What's fascinating here is how it goes beyond just military might. It's deeply intertwined with ideology, religion, and national identity. These are factors that make finding common ground and negotiating a peaceful resolution incredibly difficult.
So where do we go from here? What does this all mean? What are the potential consequences of this ongoing conflict?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just a regional conflict. It has the potential to impact global stability. We're talking about a region already on edge with multiple flashpoints. Further escalation could easily draw in other countries, ignite wider conflicts, and have devastating consequences for the entire world.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about the humanitarian impact, the fear and the disruption. But I keep thinking about the long-term consequences for people caught in the crossfire.
It's heartbreaking to think about. Millions of people are living in fear, their lives upended, unsure of what the future holds. The potential for displacement, for long-term trauma, for economic hardship. It's a heavy burden to bear. And then there's the loss of life, the injuries, the damage to infrastructure. These are scars that can take generations to heal.
Right, and it's easy to get lost in military details and political maneuvering. But we can't forget that there are real people caught in the crossfire, their lives shattered by this conflict. What are the ripple effects we could see beyond the region?
Well, imagine oil prices skyrocketing, global trade disrupted, alliances fractured. This conflict has the potential to touch us all in ways we might not even realize. It's a stark reminder of how interconnected our world is.
So is there any hope for a peaceful resolution? Or are we doomed to watch this conflict continue to escalate?
Honestly, it's hard to be optimistic. The level of mistrust between Israel and Iran is so deep, and the involvement of so many other actors makes finding a solution incredibly complex. But that doesn't mean we should give up hope. Diplomacy, however difficult, is still the best path forward.
So what can be done then? What role can the international community play in de-escalating this situation?
It's crucial for the international community to step up and exert pressure on both sides to engage in meaningful dialogue. We need to see a concerted effort to de-escalate the situation, to prevent further violence, and to work towards a lasting solution. This isn't just about Israel and Iran. It's about the security and well-being of the entire region and the world.
We've
Yeah.
we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. The history, the recent escalation, the key players, the tangled web of alliances that make this conflict so challenging to understand. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
It's certainly a complex and concerning situation. It's a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. One incident can trigger a chain reaction with devastating consequences.
And it's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the military actions, the political rhetoric. But we can't forget that this conflict is about real people, real lives being impacted in profound ways.
Absolutely. Behind every statistic, every news report, there are human stories of fear, loss, and resilience. It's important to keep that in mind as we try to understand this conflict and its implications.
Yeah, it's It's easy to get caught up in the big picture,
Mm.
the military strategies, the political maneuvering. But at the end of the day, this is about
Yeah.
about people's lives.
Exactly. And those individual stories, those human experiences often get lost in the noise of the headlines.
So for you listening, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. We focus a lot on the military and political side of this conflict, but what about the cultural and social impacts? What about the everyday lives of the people living in the shadow of this conflict?
That's a really important point. How has this ongoing tension shaped their identities, their relationships, their hopes, their dreams?
Think about those families huddled in shelters, the soldiers on both sides, facing unimaginable dangers. The diplomats working tirelessly, often behind the scenes, trying to find a path to peace.
This conflict isn't just about headlines and geopolitical chess moves. It's about real lives. And perhaps by trying to understand those individual stories, those human experiences within this larger narrative, we can start to grasp the true cost of this conflict and the urgency of finding a path to peace.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the forces at play, the stakes involved, and the human cost of this conflict. Thanks for listening.